Go to the end user issue. You may recall that ever since the Dodd-Frank conference, there's been a debate about whether non-financial end users were intended to be exempted from the margin requirements by the statute. That was clearly what the members of Congress intended. In fact, Chairman Dodd and Chairman Lincoln acknowledged that the language was intended to exempt those entities that use swaps to hedge or mitigate commercial risk. The regulators, though, have read the statute otherwise and have issued regulations now that do, in fact, require margin from those non-financial end users. And they basically take the position that, notwithstanding their understanding of congressional intent, it was the exact language that they feel bound by. Because of that, I've introduced legislation to correct that and make it clear that there is an exemption for the end users. And when he was before the Banking Committee recently, I asked this question that I'm going to ask you to Chairman Bernanke, that would it be appropriate for us to correct that language and provide an exemption for non-financial end users so that it's very clear that that is what congressional intent and what statutory language requires?
In my own view, I don't think you need to do that, because I think the way the statute was designed, you gave flexibility and discretion to the regulators to try to achieve the objective you laid out. I think the concern is if you open this up too much, you're going to let the exception undermine the critical safeguards over financial institutions that the law was absolutely intended to cover. I don't think this requires a legislative fix. I think the law gives the regulators discretion to get that balance right, but that's obviously something that we need to continue to look at, and I'd be happy to consult with you more, to talk to you more closely about it, to get a better feel for how they're defining that balance.
So are you saying that you believe that the statutory language as is currently gives the regulators the authority to exempt non-financial end users?
I think it gives the regulators, I want to be careful about how I do this, how I say this, and it's not my authority, it's the authority of the of the regulatory agencies. I believe it gives them the ability and the discretion and the authority to define an exception that I think meets your objective.
But you're not saying that there should be no exception for end users. You're saying we need to get it right.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. I believe the law, as you wrote it, does try to make sure you're not capturing people and risk you don't need to capture. But we're worried always that if you create exceptions and loopholes in this context, that you'll end up swallowing and undermining the broader safeguards that are necessary. I know that's not your intent, but that has to be our concern.
But if I understand you correctly, then you're saying that you're worried that if Congress does this, they may get it wrong and be too broad in the exception?
I didn't mean to quite imply that. I'm just saying that I think that the balance the Congress struck in the law I thought was right, and I think the regulators were given the ability to try to get that balance right.
Then would you at least agree that if the law is interpreted to mean otherwise, in other words, if the regulators, I understand the prudential regulators to be taking the position that they do not have that discretion, would you agree that the regulators need to have the discretion to address this issue and provide an appropriately formed exemption?
I think I want to talk to them a little more carefully about it and come back to you and follow up on it. But again, I just want to say this is, in general, we're trying to be very careful to make sure that we don't legislate. I know this is not your intention. We don't legislate things that would weaken the overall protections in the bill. And we think the law gave the regulators the ability to strike an appropriate balance in this context.
And you're not saying there should be no exemption appropriately defined for end users?
No, I think what I'm saying is I think they should implement the law as you intended it.
Thank you.
Senator Tesser.